So a white person goes, well, clearly every black person knows black history. Every black parent's going to talk to them about black history. My parents have never talked about Irish history or English history or anything else. They don't have to, because it's white history. But that one, there's that assumption. But two, it's also the assumption that this child would go home and actually say something to their parents. But instead, she internalized that. And that's all she saw herself as, she said, for years. And even though her parents might have said something different, but the fact is, here's her authorities at school, the textbooks, everything else that she spends most of her time with, telling her something different. And I said, you know, and we talked about that a little bit. And later on, I thought to myself, man, if that's how she saw herself, imagine how her white students saw her.
Wow.
The need for diversity and inclusion, equity and so forth in our textbooks is just as vital for the white students as it is for the students of color, because how do they see them? And yeah, you know, it's we got the slavery narrative, and okay, I would throw them a few bones, you know, okay, well here's a Harriet Tubman, here's a Dr. King, but what do you really see in the textbooks? What are you really learning about? Because the problem is really the white teachers. 80% of teachers are white women. What have they been taught, and by who? Who are they taught by? They don't know any of this stuff. I promise you. And they know a few little things here and there to get them by that they feel safe with. They're willing to talk about I have a dream, but they stop there. They don't want to say what Dr. King said before his dream, which was the reality of police brutality. Dr. King was talking about police brutality, those words, in 1963 on August 28th, the March on Washington. I have a dream was tacked on. Everything he said before that, you will never hear a white person talk about it. They don't want to talk about that stuff.
Wow.
They don't feel comfortable about it because it's.
But look, it's funny you should say something about the more history, African American history or Black history in the textbooks. In Texas, the Texas Board of Education just passed a bill where that's going to be part of the high school curriculum.
Right.
These African American studies.
Well, and the important thing as well is to look at how we talk about Black history, because Black history does not start in 1619. And, you know, because when we talk about American history, white history, we go back to Europe. We start talking about Greece and all this sort of nonsense, right? As American history. But Black history seems to start with slavery and goes from there instead of the empires and kingdoms and everything else that took place in Africa.
Well, you know, I wonder one aspect of that. You know, when they, like you mentioned about them, they can go back and talk about all that. But if you start at slavery in Black America, you can try and convince white America and even Black America that, see, you all have really, look how far you've come. You've really made advances. And then, you know, not to say, oh, you know what, you were a king over here.
Right, yeah. Well, America is about going from, you know, from nothing, it's this continuous arc of greatness, right? The Pilgrims came over, the Puritans, you know, who suffered, and now look what's flourished out of that.
Right.
What you'll never hear is the suffering that really takes place, right? So we're not going to talk about the greatness. There were cities in America, the Cahokian. We don't want to talk about what was going on with American Indians, right? So we're going to kind of ignore that, right? But yeah, exactly to your point. So slavery is a great place to start, because now we can go, well, look how far people have come. But we don't want to go, look where they were, bam, look what we did to them, and then look what happened. And of course, what's happened is, well, look what I did. Because somehow magically, I mean, you know, white people ended slavery. You know, we spilled our blood to end slavery. Look how wonderful we are.
You know,
when I talk about the civil rights movement, I say this was the first true American revolution that was for everybody. Explain to me why one out of every 8 soldiers in the Continental Army was Black. We don't want to talk about that. Let's talk about George Washington, but let's not talk quite about George Washington. We don't want to get too honest about George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or anybody else. But at the end of the day, that it gives even more credence to why racism is a social construct. Then you have to ask yourself, why does that exist? Well, part of that's written out to elevate whiteness, to go, hey, look, we're great. That's not an absence of your own greatness. White people have done great things. I mean, this is not to say white people haven't done good things. Look, every color whatever we want to call this construct, everyone has done something bad, and no one gets out of this scot-free. So what's wrong with elevating people and showing what people have contributed to the human race?
This is Laura Thompson, the host for Black Lives Matter. Where do we go from here? And the topic of discussion today is going to be white privilege. But before we get into the conversation, I would like to introduce the individuals in the room. We have our guest, Loki Mohammad. He is a civil rights activist. He is a member of Omega Psi fraternity, and he's written a documentary and produced it and directed it called The Uncomfortable Truth. And so you'll learn more about what that documentary is all about in a few minutes. And so we have Vance Bradford. He is the creator and host of In the Room, and he's also the executive producer for TAAN TV, the African American Network. We also have Phil Townsend in the room. He is the co-host for In the Room. And so we're super excited to have you as a guest today, Loki. This is a great, great time to talk about white privilege and what it means to this country. And so in the midst of, all of the protests and the issues with Black Lives Matter and just the transformation of the whole country and the way we interact with each other, I think this is a great opportunity and a great time to start this conversation. And so, first of all, we had an opportunity, all of us had an opportunity to read a lot of good things about you and your family. And so we wanted to just give you an opportunity to kind of give an introduction of yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
Well, I'm Joan's son. That probably comes out more often than not. My mom, Joan Trumpower Mulholland, who is a freedom rider and civil rights activist. Most people know her from the back of her head, she says, which is the famous Jackson World War sit-in. But by the time she was 19 years old, she had already been involved in about 3 dozen sit-ins and protests when she joined the Freedom Rides and was put on death row. And as I say, the rest is history. But yeah, so I grew up, the son of Joan and immersed in that sort of environment with the civil rights movement. I wasn't born during the civil rights movement, that was afterwards, but that was just part of our lives. And I went on to do my own thing. I didn't have to sit at the lunch counters because my mother already did, but doing nothing's not an option. So for me, it was taking the skills and the talents that I've been given with film and such and applying that. So creating documentaries on social justice and the one right now that's kind of got the buzz at the moment is The Uncomfortable Truth, which is about the history of institutional racism in America, how we got to where we are.
So why did you decide to do a film like that?
Well, I had done a film about my mother called An Ordinary Hero and her journey to the civil rights movement. And while we were making the film, one of the people we were interviewing is a gentleman named Lou Von Brown, who was a freedom rider, born and raised in Mississippi. He said something before the camera crew showed up that really just struck me. He says, everyone knows where the drugs are, but you'll never see a SWAT team raid a university. Mm-hmm. So why is that? And it just, I knew what he was talking about, but the way he said it just lit a fire under me and going, man, I got to start reading about this. And I just started studying it. And that was back in 2011. And started reading The New Jim Crow, When Affirmative Action Was White, The Combination of Blackness. So all these different books and such, I started just really doing a deep dive on the research. And at the same time, it was an exploration of, well, where does my family fit into all of this? I know my mom's story, and I knew my grandmother was a segregationist, but what happened before that? And come to find out that my family went all the way back to Jamestown. In 1610, we were one of the original planter elites. We served in the House of Burgesses. So, we kind of helped start the whole thing. And so the film becomes this journey through that history. And Levon, African-American gentleman, me, white guy, kind of going a little bit back and forth through this history and these two perspectives on that history.
Wow. So as an Anglo or Caucasian or white male or white person, how are you received by African Americans or or some of your peers or other white people when they find out, you know, that you're real active in the civil rights movement and you want to eradicate some forms of racism and white privilege?
How am I received? Well, you know, it all depends on the person, right? I mean, everyone's got an opinion about something. And, you know, for the most part, people are supportive because they know, you know, what I'm about. And you know, there's a family history of that, if you will. You're not going to please everybody, but that's par for the course. There's, you know, I've been accused of having absolute hate for the white race, you know, and it runs the gambit. You know, yeah, that's just kind of the nature of what you do when you stick your neck out. You're going to get tomatoes from people, and it's going to come from all sides. And sometimes it's even the people that you assume would you know, would be aligned with what you're about. And you know, I'm for human rights. I'm for people, and you know, my focus on that has been continuing the work that my mom had started, you know, that our family, you know, participated in. And that's the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement never ended, of course. It's transformed over time, but that's just where we're sitting at this point. And so that's my focus. I get asked all the time, well, how come you don't talk about this? How come you don't talk about that? I was like, well, first of all, I do, but right now, this is where my focus lies. This is what's most important to me.
So Phil looks like he might want to delve in and ask a couple of questions.
Hi there, Mr. Mulholland. Congratulations, first of all, on your winning an Emmy and all. That's outstanding. You know, it takes awareness, acknowledgement, and acceptance in order to make a change. How did you become aware of your white privilege?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Because you know, white people don't think about that. You have to consciously actually go there and recognize that, because our world is normed for us. Because you know, we designed it that way, we market it that way, and so we don't have to stretch ourselves. And so there's always there's always something new that, you know, creates that awareness for me, where I have to stop and reflect. So my mom went to Tougaloo College, which is an HBCU. She was the first white student there. This is right outside Jackson, Mississippi. And so in the summertime, there would be these you know, DC alumni chapter barbecues. And when I was a kid, you know, we would go there. My mom was a student, so we would go. I remember one year I looked around and was kind of like, huh, we're the only white people here. It was interesting to me to reflect on what I thought as a kid and going, this was the first time that I felt aware of my whiteness, even as just a little kid. You know, I might have been like, I think 8 or 9 years old, but suddenly it was like, oh, wow, this is, and then I felt a little uneasy. I didn't feel threatened or anything, but just kind of aware. Are people looking at me? What are people thinking about me? And when you're taken out of your comfort zone, that's, I think, really when you can start to, you know, create that awareness within yourself, particularly for a white person, because otherwise there's no other point. I don't have to worry about those things. When another incident took place, I was with a friend of mine, Terrence Brown, you know, large African-American guy. His family's from Jamaica. And we were heading to a music session. We were going to, you know, go into the recording studio in DC. Now, I'm driving. He's next to me. It's this little beat up brown Datsun, you know, and just a junker of a car. We're both in our 20s. And I suddenly realized that there was a police car following us. You know, I get to the red light. I made sure I stopped. Even if the light was yellow, I'd slow down so I at least can turn red, and I would, you know, make sure I didn't cross through. I wasn't going to give the police any excuse to pull me over. I just became really self-conscious, just uneasy. And you know, finally, I just said to, you know, Terrence, I think this cop is following us. And he looks in the side mirror, just kind of adjusts a little bit to get his view, and he's like, you know, just didn't even looked at me. He goes, happens to me all the time. And that's when I realized the cop wasn't following me, right? He was following Terrence. And, you know, again, it was this realization of the benefit of the doubt that I get. So when people ask me about white privilege, I'm like, look, it's you get the benefit of the doubt as a white person. You get the free pass. I even recently, in here in I live in Utah. Gosh, the eighth, or probably about the eighth whitest state in the union. But I was making this turn. So we have these weird intersections where you come off the off ramp of the highway, and then you can turn left. But when you turn left, you're actually in the left lane. It's almost like this bridge becomes British, and then they cross. It's this weird sort of thing. But it's so weird that they have to put signs up that say, left turn must yield to through traffic on red, right? So I have to stop at the red light, make sure that the traffic coming from the right, isn't going to hit me, and then I have to yield to that traffic, and then I can go. And I'm turning left, and it's so confusing. They have 2 or 3 signs. Well, this was brand new. I pull up. I'm in the left lane, and the middle lane was a police officer. I'm doing it. I pulled up, made a complete stop, put my turn signal on, look for the through traffic, nothing was coming, and I turned left. Second I turned left, police officer put on his lights, put on his sirens, woo, pulled me over. I'm like, all right. And I said, he said, I pulled you over. I said, I have no idea. He says, well, because you turned left on a red. I'm like, well, yeah, that's what the sign says. But you can't do that. I said, no, I can. He said, we're not going to argue about this. I said, well, good. There's nothing to argue about. I can get away with that. I asked a friend of mine who, fraternity brother, who's former football player, large African-American gentleman, Pastor Lynch. I said, now what would you have done? He goes, I wouldn't even try. I said, I knew better not to even think that. It's because when I get in my car, I have to think about where my wallet is in my car. Not because I had too many hits to the head as a football player, because I have to know where I'm reaching if they pull me over. That doesn't look like I'm reaching for a gun. And when I tell people that, I tell white audience members that when I speak, I'm like, well, what do you do when you get in your car? Do you just put the key in the ignition and turn it on? And they're like, yeah. I said, that's white privilege.
So you kind of explained the 2 scenarios of the being pulled over by police officers. I wanted to go to some of the police brutality or the police killings of African-American males. If George Floyd had been white, what do you think that experience might have been in terms of interacting with the police officers on that particular day?
Well, it's unique to each police officer, but in general, he'd still be alive today. Particularly when you take a look at what the police officer is doing and the cavalier nature that he has about it. I have a podcast series called The Uncomfortable Truth. We actually have an episode where we talk with a former police officer who's African-American. He talks about the culture within the police force. He says, it's not necessarily that they're talking about, being racist and stuff and those sort of things, but the culture within the police force is an us versus them and a mentality that you need to come home alive. And yet, their training was to go into Black neighborhoods. So instantly, as police officers, you're already conditioned to think this way about those communities and about the people within those communities, even as a Black person, right? So there's this diet that they're fed that's already reinforced by society, from media and so forth. That's the criminal Black man. So the new code term now that they use is I felt threatened. As long as a police officer says I felt threatened, done. They're pretty safe. I think that's actually one of the police officers who's African American. That was of the 3 police officers that was there, who just. His defense right now is, I felt threatened. I'm like, at what point in the 8 minutes and 46 seconds did you feel threatened? Right. But that's the excuse they can use. It's the, Jimmy Lee Jackson, right? This is back Selma Montgomery that became the catalyst for that march. The police officer said, I thought he was reaching for his gun. How many times have we heard that one? So it's the same language over and over again. But at the end of the day, with him, and we've seen white people who've threatened the police, who've waved guns around and so forth, who've gone in, like in Colorado, would go into a movie theater fully armed with all the protection they need, blowing people away, and the police somehow managed to capture this guy. Dylan Roof, in South Carolina, they take him to Burger King. Now, legally they had to. Let's just be clear on that. Legally they had to under humanitarian rights because he was hungry and hadn't eaten for a few days. So they had to, but they can't let a man breathe. You can give a man food for killing people, but you can't let a man breathe for maybe knowingly passing a counterfeit bill. I don't think he knew it. And maybe being drunk. It's for, it's, you know, in Atlanta, running away from the police with a taser. That was already fired, I think, twice. So it wasn't actually going to work again. And it's the same rhetoric over and over and over again.
Wow. That made me feel some kind of way when you said that they had to feed him, or they had to take this guy to get something to eat because it's the humanitarian thing to do.
Well, legally from a humanitarian standpoint, there's laws that they have to do that. That kind of gets missed in that description when people talk about that. So a lot of times, like, well, look, the police are just, you know, look how they treated them. Well, they have to, but you know, the fact that they be willing to, but not let a man breathe.
Wow. So Phil.
Yes, my question is, how do you help people who have this, you know, white privilege, make them aware that they have this privilege? That seems to be the big issue that I can't seem to get across sometimes.
Yeah. You know, one of the things when I speak with white people, you know, one of the advantages I have is that I'm white when I speak to them, because I'm not the angry black man. I'm not the angry black woman, right? There's not a fear that they're going to say something wrong. But what I explain to them is, you know, understand this is not your fault, because the way white people look at racism is slavery, Jim Crow, burning crosses, black and white photographs. You know, I got a few right behind. Oh, let's see which shoulder there, right there. You know, there's my mom right there on the lunch counter, right? But that's the way they look at those things, and so it's kind of stuck in the past. It's like, well, look, you weren't around for slavery, you weren't around for Jim Crow. That's not what people are saying, and so that's not your fault. You know, so you hear that, why never own any slaves? Well, I'm glad you didn't, and you are correct. And so what I do is I take them through that history lesson about what actually happened and how we are downstream of the past, how the history was rewritten by the Daughters of the Confederacy, right? So in short, you were duped. And then I also talk about how the human brain works, that we are all conditioned to be prejudiced. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's how it works. So what is your brain being filled with with that gap? Well, for 400 years, you know, white people in particular, it's been filled with the angry black man, you know, the black beast rapist narrative, all those sort of things that says, uh-oh, here comes a black guy, he's wearing the hoodie, uh-oh, what does this mean? Again, we all do this. That's not exclusive to white people. So we all prejudge people we see based on, you know, whatever they look like, whatever they sound like. We all do that. So that's where I say, look, that's not your fault. Now that you know the history, which I'm going to tell you, going forward, what you do with that is up to you. Now you're accountable. I explained to them, you know, so my mom's got this incredible history. You know, they got statues of her and those sort of things and whatnot. And she's in all these films and stuff. I said, but you know, my mom still has racist tendencies. That shocks people. Like, how's that even possible? I mean, she's Joan. And it's like, well, she grew up in America, just like you. The difference is she does something about it. So when a thought comes to her mind, you know, she didn't know the N-word was a bad word until she was 13 years old, mind you. But when a thought comes to mind, she stops, thinks about it, analyzes it, and works it out to, okay, how do I make sure that doesn't happen again? So while we have been fed this one diet, we are capable of feeding our brains other information to counter that narrative, so that when something occurs, we can sit there and start a different thought process. Wow. And so it becomes a much more natural, habitual way of seeing something. So that when you hear someone say, well, you know, they're rioting, hold on, wait a second. You know, maybe they're protesting. Right. Let's talk about that for a moment. Wow. And it's changing the language as well. I did an interview last night, my mom and I, with Willie D, you know, the Ghetto Boys. He's got a show he does on YouTube. And I talked about the language we even use, like the word slave. You know, He said, well, your people, your family owned slaves. I said, well, our family enslaved people, right? We need to get back to humanizing people. They're not illegal aliens. They're human beings searching for a better life. They weren't, slaves never came from Africa. Human beings came from Africa and were enslaved, right? So we need to change that narrative, and those little things make a big difference. A lot of a little is still a lot. So as we change that narrative and those different points in the story, that's where that change starts to really take place. But again, now that you know, what are you going to do with that information? That's where you become accountable. And what I'm seeing with people who are watching The Uncomfortable Truth, white people in particular, is I never knew this. Why wasn't I taught this? And they really feel, that they were hoodwinked, that something was stolen from them in regards of a history that they should have known, that they were lied to. And people don't like being lied to.
So often white people see that when Black people get a societal gain, that means that it has to be a negative. When having privilege just gives you all the opportunities for success, what would be impetus for you to change, to give it up, to share it?
Well, it's about changing that narrative, because again, there's this us versus them mentality, and it's this idea that like equality is a finite resource, that it's a pie, and boy, there's my slice, and if I have to give up some of my slice, I've got less. Well, no, that's not what the Declaration of Independence says. All men are created equal, right? And women, of course, but we are all created equal. So we all have that. The problem is that even though the Constitution and such to this point guarantees that, it hasn't been, actually enacted equally. And so you're not taking anything from me. We're just allowing other people to have what they've already been given by our Constitution. There's also been this history, and this is what I remember, this other point, is that you'll take a look at like the Tulsa, right? Greenwood District, okay, Black Wall Street. There's been other places like Rosewood and so forth where white people, all of a sudden, they are told if you don't have something, it's because they've got it. And there's this idea that, well, if Black people or anyone else is successful, it must have been because, and I'm not successful, right? If I'm poor and they're rich, they must have taken it. It's the welfare queen who's got the Cadillac, all that sort of, nonsense, like Reagan, talked about. But the idea is if they've got it, it's because they've somehow managed to take it from me. Not that there's super rich white people who own businesses that really took it from you, stole your labors as well in regards of suppressed wages, right? I guess, stole your income, right? Because during segregation, once enslaved people were freed, now you have to pay them, right? Well, crap, if we have to pay them, then that means we need to increase the wages of white people, because we've told them for so long they're better, so we got to pay them better. But they don't want to pay them better. So we're going to pay Black people less and still keep their wages down, and then say, but you know what, at least you're not Black. And we're going to throw you a few bones. You're going to make you feel like you're better because you're white. You're one of us. And we see that, Trump does that all the time. He is Mr. Billionaire. He's not, but he likes to think he is. And then he says, and I'm one of you guys. So they're going, hey, look, I'm rich. See, look, we're successful. No, he's successful. You're not. And the reason you're not is because look at the horde of immigrants coming up the road, right? They're coming to invade your country and take your jobs. Or, the standard narrative that, Black people are going to steal stuff from you, right? Wow. And so because of that, what ends up happening, like in the Tulsa, in the Greenwood District, the Black Wall Street, is, well, they've got something that should have been mine. I'm going to burn them to the ground. When you start to understand that history and that what really goes on, this is what Dr. King was all about in the last of his days, was, we need to bring poor whites and poor Blacks together. because they have something in common. They're poor and they're being screwed by the same person.
Hmm.
You bring that together, and that's a problem. You know, they were fine with Dr. King doing civil rights stuff because that wasn't going to change too much anyways. But the second you start talking about poor whites and poor blacks getting together, suddenly he gets killed.
I speak with white people all the time, and they think that we have the same gained advantages. They think that if we both grew up poor, that we're on equal standing.
Right.
One, that's all relative.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up on welfare. He grew up with a dad that's a professor at a university and a mom that's a nurse, but he relates to it that he grew up poor equally with me.
Mm-hmm.
But just, I guess my question is, how do you effectively explain to white people that their skin color is invaluable to them in America?
That white people's skin color is the advantage. Understanding how poor white and poor black are not the same thing.
Right.
You get that rhetoric of pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I hear that all the time. Well, it's like, well, that's great if you're allowed to buy the boots, right? Mm-hmm. It's giving in the historical context of the disadvantages that took place. So in the Uncomfortable Truth, we actually focus in on one particular aspect, which is the GI Bill and the creation of wealth in America, which is through our homes. And that really opened up greater access to wealth creation, was the GI Bill. And so, but it was, even though it was open to all veterans, it was not, there was a little poison pill in that respects that it had to be allocated or approved locally. So what that meant is that the government didn't actually give you the money, they only guaranteed it. Mm-hmm. If you could get it. So what happened is, so a black person could walk into a bank in Mississippi and go, hey, I got this GI Bill, can you give me some money for a business, for a home, or for school? And the white bank goes, yeah, I'm sorry, you don't qualify. Right. So now suddenly you roll forward a few years, and when those mortgages are coming due and so forth, or well, not coming due, but when those mortgages are ending, and now you got this wealth built up in a house. Well, now what you can do with that is, a lot of people did was they refinanced the house, pulled that money out to educate their children, or to buy another house and rent that and create wealth. Right? There's not as much of an income disparity as there is the wealth disparity. So for every dollar a white person has in wealth, a black person has 8 to 10 cents. And that's not by accident. That's from policy. Part of the challenge you have is that people are so uneducated that they don't understand what that even means. But then also, you have to break it down and explain how, well, our education system, the majority of the money in education comes from local property tax, not from the federal government, from local property taxes. And so now you have this advantage of living in a higher income area, which is a higher property value area, because you're white, because of redlining and so forth. Now you have better education, and the area you lived in has created, all jobs are filled, majority of jobs are filled through networking. I think 80% of jobs are filled through networking. Well, if everyone you go to church with and everyone that lives in your neighborhood is white, who are you going to hire? Mm-hmm. Right. And we already know from the studies of resumes and so forth of the discrimination that took place just based on a black name, right? Everything being equal, all of a sudden, having a name that sounded black, and white people know what black names sound like. They have all the stereotypes in their heads instantly. That suddenly, I don't know them or where they're coming from. Instantly that discrimination comes into play that has surrounded them, that bias that exists. And so coming back, and when you can start to relate the personal in that and help them see the stories, the one-on-ones, a lot of times you can distill, like the GI Bill, down to an individual. You can distill education down to an individual. Suddenly they start to understand on a personal level. And that's one of the major barriers is that as a hyper-segregated society, still to this day, we still have those challenges where there's not that meaningful relationship, that there's that level of trust to have those conversations. So I have a film called Black, White, and Us, which is about racism through the lens of transracial adoptions. These were white families who believed racism didn't exist anymore, and then they adopted these Black children. And oh my gosh, racism is now personal. They actually can see it on a regular basis with their children and what happens. And now suddenly they're going, oh, wait a second, I understand my privilege. Because they can see even though they're living in the same household, they could be walking in the same store and their children are getting treated differently because no one thinks those kids are with them. Instant bias comes in.
Wow.
And they can see that in real time. These aren't stories in black and white photographs. So yeah, so that's how you get there is really about that. To me, is about making that personal connection and seeing that, and moving beyond exceptionalism as well, because there's always the story. Well, look what he did. It's like, okay, well, by using that example of that one successful Black person, all Black people should be successful. Then how come every white person isn't Bill Gates? Tell me that. I mean, give me a break, right? Don't give me this exception story over here when majority of white, almost a majority of white people are middle class or less.
Wow.
Vast majority. There's more white people on welfare than Black people.
Of course. More white people.
Right. They don't want to talk about that.
Right. So Vance had a question. He wasn't able to verbalize it yet, but he has a question, and he said, "Why did you choose Omega Sci-Fi, and what's been your experience since crossing the burning sands?"
All right, why Omega Sci-Fi? I get that asked a lot. Well, why not? See, I believe that you start at the top of the mountain, and then you work down from there, and Omega Sci-Fi is at the top of the mountain. So that's where I was.
Okay.
but in all honesty, my mom's a Delta, right? There's a history and connection there. But, out here where I live in Utah, we got a strong presence of an Omega Sci-Fi. It's a small chapter, but a strong presence. And I found my interactions there and the principles therein of Omega Sci-Fi. Not that other, the Divine Nine don't share those same principles, but with Coleman Love and with the brotherhood there that existed, it was just the right fit for me.
Wow.
And the embrace that was there. There was none of the, I go a lot of places and a lot of people, it's oh, your mom, and it's they respect my mom, but it was like, well, you ain't here for your mother. I'm like, no, I'm my own man, and I'm doing my own thing, but and they see me for the works that I'm doing, and I love it. I mean, it's been great for me. I mean, it's I feel at home, because people aren't sitting there trying to, get excited about, they know me well enough. They're going, hey, that's great. You're doing this interview, whatever else, it could be anything, but we got work to do. Let's go to work.
Right. So when I think about white privilege, I think about a spoiled kid that's been given everything,
yeah,
and that they don't want to share, and so I just think that your approach is a really good approach, because you kind of push buttons and really make people aware of what they're doing. A spoiled kid they're not aware of what they're doing. They're not aware that they can't have everything that they want, or that they're going to get some pushback.
Right.
And that when someone tells them no, or tries to take something from them, they have a temper tantrum. And I've seen that, that kind of behavior. And I just compare it to a spoiled kid.
Yeah. Well, it's so men do this to women and just in general. We see that in the boardrooms and so forth, where it's stepping over people to talk and so forth, that invisibility. So and you'll see that amongst white men in particular, is that, if someone's going to be a racist, guess what? They're probably going to be a sexist and everything else in between. All the other isms are going to be there for them, because it's that sense of superiority, right? Top of the food chain. And it's part of the problem is that I see a lot is that, and I say this, that when you attack someone's ignorance, they're going to double down on stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is that they get defensive, like you're saying, right? I like, it's easy for me to say, well, I like to assume the best of people, and that maybe they just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Give them the benefit of the doubt, because if we really want to change, racism, we got to be willing. That's people. Changing the system is changing people.
Mm-hmm.
And if people always feel under attack, well, they're always going to, no matter how stupid their narrative is, they're going to defend it, because of their pride. And so to assume that they just don't know, and maybe that's an opportunity to teach.
Mm-hmm.
That takes a lot of patience. And it's like, well, how do you not know this? I mean, good grief, take a look around. Did you learn anything? It's all there on the internet, right? Mm-hmm. It's all these books. Well, rebuilding your engine of your car is also on the internet. So why can't you do that?
Right. That's
right.
True.
It's because that's not where your focus is. A lot of people, look, the average person in America has $400 to their name. They're focused on trying to survive. Mm-hmm. And so, and then, oh, well, yeah, equal rights, this sort of stuff. Okay. Yeah. They don't understand how that applies to them as well. So again, coming back to that, this is a capitalist society. Boy, I mean, you start making things equal and lifting wages for other people, guess what's going to happen for you, right? But it's meeting people where they are and then bringing them along.
Right, I agree.
No matter how ignorant that might be.
Mm-hmm.
But I had someone say to me, do you really think the Confederate flag is racist? Now my instinct was, what are you, a moron? I was like, okay, let me take a step back. This is a white educated male in his 40s, grew up in Utah. I'm like, okay, well, that checks off some boxes for me, right? Okay. I said, well, what do you think it represents? His answer was, well, I don't know. Okay, me being born in Virginia, I knew exactly what it represented. I said, well, it represents the states that seceded from the Union. Oh yeah, well, of course. I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe he thought it was a trick question, right? I said, well, why did the state secede? He said, state rights. Okay, state rights. I said, the right to do what? He never thought this out. He had his sound bites. And so, that intellectual, the ability to kind of really, think about it just wasn't there. That just takes work. But by asking the questions, I made him work for it. Mm-hmm. He said, well, the right to do what? He said, own people. I said, well, yeah, we call that slavery. And, so now, is slavery racist? He said, well, yes. Okay. Because that's a safe answer. Everyone can agree slavery is racist. And I said, well, if slavery is racist, then the Confederate flag must be. He said, oh, well, racist. Like, right. Never thought of that way. How did you not think of it that way? Right. Again, what diet was he fed? Heritage, not hate. Right. It's a heritage of hate. And so I said, well, the reason you're asking this question, because this was back when, the shootings in South Carolina at the church. The reason you're asking that is because they're taking down the flags in South Carolina. He goes, yeah, this is obviously a few years ago. I said, well, where did those flags go up? Above those Capitol buildings. I said, well, I don't know. I said, well, you right after the Civil War, maybe? He goes, yeah, that's what I would think. I was like, well, no, actually, that wasn't the case, because that was another country, right? These were traitors. The flag went up after Brown versus Board, and the state said the federal government is not going to tell us what to do. State rights. That segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. That was the mantra, right? They put them up in protest saying we are always going to be segregation. This is what we stand for. That's what that flag represents to them, Now, is segregation racist? He goes, well, yeah, of course. Okay, so again, if segregation's racist, then the Confederate flag must be. He's like, oh, racist. Like, right. Now, if I attacked him, that would have been a very short conversation. I could have felt really good about myself, put it on Facebook, man, I just lit this guy up, and that didn't solve anything. But by walking him through that, and again, I get the privilege of patience for that. I don't have to, bear those burdens. That, plus he was willing to ask that question. Believe me, he wouldn't have asked you guys those questions. A white person's not going to go to a black person and go, hey, do you think the Confederate flag is racist? This doesn't happen, right? I was actually literally in a church in Albany, Georgia, right? We're shooting a video, and the white person there was about 3 white people and about 14 African Americans, and this was a church where Dr. King had given some speech or something like that. And the white guy says to me, "So do you really think that like the police are really doing this to African Americans? Why do African Americans feel this way about the police?" And I'm looking around. I said, "Why are you asking me this?" I said, "There's 14 black people here you could ask that same question to." Mm-hmm. But he didn't want to go there and sound racist. He was afraid he might get attacked. I might get the angry black man, right? All of a sudden, all of those stereotypes started, already created that bias that he couldn't even ask the question because he had the assumption that, it was going to, get lit up. I'm like, well, you're in a church. That's a pretty safe place, right? But, that ability to have that conversation and have that dialogue starts with that relationship, that level of trust that can exist. But our society, again, is so hyper-segregated that we've created ways to keep people separate so that doesn't take place. Because as long as we keep people separate, we can have an us versus them, and we can feed the base, like Trump was doing at that Tulsa rally on June 20th, where he's like, they're trying to destroy your heritage. That's what he said. Talking about the statues, that's a little wink and nod to the statues, but your heritage, yours. Mm-hmm. That's what Ahmaud Arbery's running down the street, and what did this guy say? He was running in our neighborhood. Our neighborhood.
Wow.
I mean, there's a reason why that language exists. This is America. This is our country, all of us. We all live here. So we need to get beyond that language, but that becomes building those relationships. And people like to say it's the South. It's like, look, New York is the most diverse city in the world, but yet it has the most segregated school districts in the country. What does that mean?
This is a great, great, great conversation. And we're here with Mr. Loki Mohammad. And he's speaking about some of the identifiers of white privilege. And it's been a great, great lesson so far. We want to probably ask him back to do some more conversations, because I think it's a way to create awareness for all of us. But before we close this out, I wanted to see if Phil had any additional questions. And then Loki, I wanted you to talk a little bit briefly about your documentary before we go. But Phil, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I'll ask one more question, but it's going to be in part a statement. I find it interesting that you mentioned that racism is a mental health, because in the early 60s, Black psychiatrists concluded that racism was akin to delusion. An attempt by the government to resolve this, they said, was in order to end racism, that it was going to take a massive and unprecedented commitment and effort and resources from white America. Mm-hmm. Can you agree with that, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, again, I mean, now suddenly it's going to take resources. That's money, and that's of course, that's you're taking it from us and giving it to them again. Well, yeah, racism is a white disease that we ask people of color to cure, and white people created racism and white supremacy. So we should really be the ones that are dismantling it. At the end of the day, it's incumbent upon us to really, do the hard work. Stop asking everyone else to solve our problem. The effects we can see, and this is where it's exacted upon people of color, right? But the cause is us. So, to really make that change, white people really need to be able to start looking at themselves, because we don't see ourselves as a race, right? We see everyone else as different, as other. It really surprises people when I tell them, I said, you do realize white people are a minority in the world. You do know that, right? That blows their minds. And again, this comes back to this, the language, the mentality, all these little pieces that need to come together. And that white people need to really start looking at themselves. I mean, Stokely Carmichael, right? I mean, that's this, the schism and SNCC that took place, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee with John Lewis and Stokely. Stokely was like, look, white people, y'all need to go home and start talking to white people. That's the problem. You're down here trying to do this for us, but we don't need you here. We need you back, go back to your homes and start talking to your people and solve your problems. Your problem is you're the racist. So when white people think about racism, even though we know we're seeing, well, this is, it's black people, right? That not that black people are racist, that's the problem, is that people are being racist against black people. They just don't see themselves as being the one being racist. That's someone else, right? That's the guy in the hood, right? And burning the cross. Not me. I'm a nice person, so it can't be me. And they don't understand the dynamics of all the microaggressions and so forth. That racism is not black and white photographs, right? There's a lot more to it than that. It's those unconscious biases and those unconscious choices that we make every day. So when saying nothing says everything. So someone makes a racist joke or a sexist joke or a homophobic joke, whatever it might be, whatever isms, and you laugh or you say nothing. You laugh because you're uncomfortable. You don't want to be the person who stands out, or you don't say anything at all. Then guess what? You just validated that. Now that person might not think that you're validating it, but it just creates that atmosphere that everything's okay and everything's not okay. And it's up to us to make that, and people need to be called out for it. How we call people out, that tact is, it's open for debate. I'm one who says, we need, attacking people's ignorance. Sometimes, it doesn't matter anyways, they're not going to listen. But if we want to actually get to people and talk to them, it's about really having conversations and real dialogue. And that ain't on Facebook, right? That's one-on-one. I've asked LeVon Brown, who's in The Uncomfortable Truth. He's the freedom rider from Mississippi. I said, what do you do? He says, well, look, there's some people, they don't want to have that conversation. I'm like, I know exactly where they're at. I'm like, F you, and I just walk away, right? Because you ain't going to change that person. Don't matter anyways. Those who actually want to have a conversation, even if I don't agree with them, but they want to have a conversation, I'll have the conversation with them, because because you reap what you sow. And if I'm planting seeds in them, at some point, that's going to change. Don't know when. It might not be my time, but it's going to happen somewhere down the line.
Wow. So that's a great conversation so far. I wanted to see what you thought about these major companies and corporations putting money somewhere, as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement, or in the name of the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests that have been going on. They've been putting companies have been investing a lot of money into advocacy groups. And so, and you really kind of don't see where it goes, but that a statement has been made that all of this money has been invested. What do you think about that?
Well, there's a couple of things I think about that. One is I mean, it's good that they do give the money, but why are they giving it, and why did it take them so long to do that? The tone is set at the top. So yeah, so diversity, you can have a very diverse company and zero inclusion, right? And you get company, oh, well, look, we're really diverse. It's like, yeah, but your company might be 20% African American, but they all work in the warehouse. None of them are in the suites, the C suites, right? None of them are managers. So how diverse are you? What does your board look like? Who's sitting around the table? Diversity in color and gender and in thought, right? There's always that need there. And so, yeah, you can give the money and that's great, but the culture needs to change within that organization so that you would have been doing that all along anyways. My attitude right now is, man, those boycotts back, with Medgar Evers, and actually today is Medgar Evers' birthday, right? And so the Jackson boycott, man, suddenly when you hit their pocketbooks, before racism didn't matter as much, right? Because they love the color green. And Starbucks like, oh, you ain't gonna be wearing no Black Lives Matter shirts in there. All of a sudden, the Black community said, all right, where else are we gonna go get our coffee? Oh, wait, Black Lives Matter? Yeah, we love those shirts. I mean, within a day, it's flipped. So I'm like, man, let's just boycott racism, Let's bankrupt it. Let's bankrupt racism. People get the message real fast. That's my attitude. But, maybe I'm just, like Fannie Lou Hamer, a little sick and tired of being sick and tired of it all. But I don't believe in a cancel culture in regards to just blowing people up and just going, well, yeah, because we all make mistakes. We got to be willing to allow people to change. People, you'll know if they changed or not. All right. And some people have, we all have got stuff in our past. But what are we doing now? And what are we doing to be willing to change? But some of those people out there, who are, who own businesses and are making these super crass statements at this time, let's call them out on it. You reap what you sow, and we shouldn't be giving them their money. If we truly believe that everyone should be treated equal, then, in a capitalist society, a lot of that comes down to the dollar. As fair as, or not that might be, that we have to accept that fact that that's, part of the equation. And that's what they recognize with the boycott. So, and we're still capable of doing that as a society, despite Amazon and everything else, business is still local. And, it might be McDonald's might be a huge corporation, but if there's a McDonald's and a management there is treating people of color like crap, then, boycott that McDonald's. Believe me, they know when their store, year over year for store sales drops, and they're going to find out why. And then you go, this is why we're not shopping here. And that can still happen. And then suddenly, when that store, they're going, okay, what happened in all the other stores? And then social media goes, oh my gosh, you can do that in that store? Wow. Now all of a sudden it starts to pick up steam. And then corporate is going to go, hey, look, we don't support this. These type of managers, these type of owners who are making the rest of us look bad. What happened in Greensboro on February 1st, 1960, that sit-in when those four guys sat at the lunch counter, didn't make a difference in Jackson, Mississippi, right? Because everything's local. Jackson, Mississippi happened on May 28th at that lunch counter, 1963. But within a matter of months of February 1st, 70,000 people were sitting at lunch counters throughout the South. While we have to focus on the local, it's still, even at that time, without the internet and anything else, it still made an impact. But it impacted Greensboro, and then someone in St. Petersburg, Florida said, I'm going to do this, and someone in Arlington, Virginia said, I'm going to do this, and then, but all those locals started adding up till finally Woolworths had enough because money talks.
Mm-hmm. So, so that was a great answer. This has been a great conversation as well. You tuned into TAAN TV, the African American Network. We have a local feel and a global reach. And we're here with Loki Mohammad, Vance Bradford, and Phil Townsend. And I have one last question of you. I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about your Uncomfortable Truth documentary, how it's doing, and why you did it.
Well, the film's The Uncomfortable Truth is about the history of institutional racism in America. So how we got to where we are. The film's doing great. It's on Amazon Prime. We've had over 500,000 views lately, and people are just really kind of gravitating towards it and really getting a sense of this history. And it's the film was structured to point the fingers back at my family because people don't like to feel attacked. And so instead of pointing my fingers at other people and like, you know, look how horrible you are, it's like, well, look, this is what my family did. This was our involvement in this history. And our history goes back to Jamestown, 1610. So we're one of the original planter elites. We served in the House of Burgesses. We helped start the whole thing. And there's this narrative through the film of me, a white guy, Lou Von Brown, a black guy, talking about this history and our respective places in that, and our perspectives, these two Americas that exist. And so that's the film. I did it. And the opening of the film actually kind of explains a little bit about that, about the why, because I saw some people who were on Facebook making some comments, and then I'm like, my gosh, these guys they're racist and don't even know it. My mom sat at the lunch counters. She rode the buses and those sort of things, right? She was heavily involved in the civil rights movement. And I don't have to sit at those lunch counters because she did, but I have to do what I can do because doing nothing's not an option. So I've taken the skills and gifts that I've been given, and I do this film. I have a podcast series of the same name, The Uncomfortable Truth, where we continue that conversation that was started in the film, bring it up to date and such, and have and continue to have that dialogue that Levon and I had in the film, because we all play a role in this. And as it was said earlier, it's incumbent upon me, people who look like me, who created this, to help end it. And so that's the motivation of the film, is to continue the work my mother started and keep moving it forward.
Wow. So it can be seen on Amazon Prime?
Right. Yeah, Amazon Prime, and then DVDs we have available at our website, which is jtmfoundation.org. It's a foundation that was set up, JTM Foundation, Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation. We exist to end racism through education. The next film that I have that's out already, I have 4 films that are out, but the next most important one is called After Selma. It's about voter suppression since the Selma to Montgomery March, and features Carol Anderson, who wrote White Rage, One Person, No Vote, and Joanne Blackman Bland, who's the civil rights stalwart in Selma, who's on the Edmund Pettus Bridge that day. And we talk about what's happened since everyone got the right to vote, right? And we need to understand what voter suppression is all about. It's about maintaining the status quo. And if you don't think your vote matters, then ask yourself, why are they trying so hard to take it away?
Wow. So when is your expected release date for that one?
It's already out.
It's already out?
I put it out in November, 1 year from the 2020 election.
Wow. Wow. So that's a good one to show too, as well, at a time like this. Plus, the election is getting ready to come up again for 2020. So.
That's right.
Wow. So, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to stop by and talk to TAAN TV and participate in our Black Lives Matter, where do we go from here conversation. And so you gave us some really good key points and tips of the necessity to educate people on their racism and try to implement change from that standpoint. So I think that's a great approach, and I think you're the man for the job. It's interesting to hear and great to hear that you are part of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and that you participated in a lot of civil rights. So you have a history and a background and a context to really discuss this conversation of white privilege. And so, we appreciate you coming out. And I don't know, I saw Phil fidgeting a little bit up there. Maybe he's thinking of one more question. Phil?
No, I just wanted to applaud him for going out and understanding that educating people is what's going to help in this racism. But I think the importance there is that even if that person takes it back to their community, to where maybe this whole thing evolves, at least it gives them another option, another thought pattern, to where when they start looking and seeing and saying, hey, it's not matching up what they're saying with what I'm seeing. So I really believe that that educational aspect is very important. But something that we've really got to do is we have to eradicate racism out of legislation in this government. I mean, you know, everything from housing to judicial policies, things that just, you know, don't match up with how Black people are treated versus white people. And hopefully through your education, this will help get younger people, when they get in and they're doing government policy, they'll see it and say, hey, this has to change. This just isn't done properly. So thank you again for your effort.
No, thank you. And voting is where it's at. The civil rights movement, you know, as they were integrating the different, you know, platforms, if you will, buses and lunch counters and, you know, bathrooms and such. What they really found out at the end of the day was nothing's really going to change until you can vote and you know, and vote those people out and vote people in who are actually in support of you know, of justice and equality. And that's why voter suppression is so rampant. Our system is, you know, built on this idea that everyone gets to vote. And then the realization became as well, we can't allow everyone to vote, right? Because then they'll change the system. So the suppression has taken place since then. Suddenly, you know, so we continue to see that to this day. And that's why it's so vital for us to do that. And we see all across, and particularly local. I mean, local elections are so vital because, I mean, they pour money, millions of dollars into local elections. I mean, even down to school boards. There's, you know, they know how vital that is. And why a school board? Because guess what? You're going to be teaching people about how to make a difference. You know, you start teaching about civil rights and so forth, and social justice, and about caring about people. Oh, well, man, that could really change things. You know, they don't want change.
They're getting ready to get it because Loki's on the path. It's
you know, one of my chapter brothers, a good friend, Pastor Martin Lynch III, says, you know, we need each other to survive. It takes all of us. We all have to be willing to do our part. As my mom has said, you know, I can't do everything, but I can do something, because doing nothing's not an option. We just got to make sure we're doing something.
So thank you so much, Loki, for coming out and hanging out with us on TAAN TV for the Black Lives Matter, Where Do We Go From Here series. This is Laura Thompson with TAAN TV, the African American Network. We have a local feel and a global reach, and we've been here with Loki Mohammad. He is the writer, producer, director of
An Ordinary Hero, The Uncomfortable Truth, Black, White, and Us, After Selma.
Wow, that's great. And we've also been here with Phil Townsend, co-host for In the Room, and Vance Bradford, executive producer of TAAN TV, and host and creator of The Room. So thank you for tuning in. Ciao.
Black Lives Matter. They continue to pull us down from that kingdom.